So thank you all. I'm Bridget Almas. I am Director of Community Supported Technologies at Lyrasis. And I'll thank you for giving me the opportunity to come chat today. Just a little bit about myself. I have a background in software development. I've worked in commercial, academic, nonprofit software development pretty much my whole career. Most of that has been using or creating open source software in one way or another. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I joined Lyrasis back in May as Director of Community Supported Technologies, which was awesome because it gave me a chance to really put some of that history working with open source into the work of helping to sustain it. Um, and I'll tell you a bit more about what my role is at Lyrasis in the organizational home, but just some context for why I'm here. Eric Mitchell, who is a member of Curios, and the chair of ArchivesSpace, he and I were discussing the potential for overlap between OSPOs and the activities of the organizational home in supporting open source software interests of academic institutions. And so I want to thank Eric for raising this idea for me to come talk to you about today. Um, well, I know the focus of OSPOs are really in open source software related to research. Um, as I know you are probably all aware, open source software also is often a critical component of the infrastructure supporting research, such as institutional repositories. And infrastructure is often, by its nature, invisible and thus really might not be top of mind for the focus of OSPOs, but it has many of the same sustainability needs and questions, as does the software that's being used to generate the research. So, interestingly, most members of Curios are also users and supporting members of at least one and several more than one of the 5 open source community supported technologies that are currently part of the Lyrasis organizational home. So we wanted to explore whether there's anything to be learned from bringing together OSPO leaders and library open source product leaders, specifically in thinking about how OSPO concepts and approaches might help libraries consider and support library open source products in different ways. And, wondering, is this an opportunity to avoid creating unnecessary silos about how academic institutions approach their role in sustaining open source that's critical to their mission? So that's really what I'm hoping to engage in discussion with you all about. Um, but to start, although I know some of you are already familiar with the Lyrasis organizational home, but for those of you that aren't, I wanted to start with a quick overview of what that is. And at Lyrasis, we use this term to describe the set of services that we provide in partnership with community to help sustain and grow important open source technologies for digital cultural heritage and open science. So what is an organizational home actually in practice? It starts with a community supported technology. We use the CST as an acronym for that. And a CST is really an open source technology with a community committed to its maintenance. And we use the term program to mean the collective set of initiatives that are driven by the community to support the work of sustaining that technology. A CST program enters into an agreement with Lyrasis to serve as its organizational home. Lyrasis provides the operational infrastructure that's necessary to function. So it acts as the legal entity enabling CST program staff to hire staff, the CST program to hire staff, sign contracts, issue and pay invoices, collect funds from members or other sources. It provides access to all of the normal functions of an organization, such as IT infrastructure, human resources, and so forth. A note that Lyrasis also offers paid hosting services for open source technologies in this library, archives, galleries, and museum space. And although hosting services are not part of the organizational home, they are a service of Lyrasis that may overlap with the CST program. That's why it's in the diagram here. Lyrasis currently offers hosting for several, but not all, of the technologies that are currently part of the organizational home. And as a hosting provider for these technologies, Lyrasis thus is also a member of the community and may provide code contributions back to them. one of the things that we've done recently at Lyrasis is to try to articulate what are the core principles behind the organizational home. And these are the principles that guide our decision making and approach. So we look for programs that are mission aligned with the Lyrasis mission to catalyze and enable equitable access to the world's knowledge and cultural heritage. So it's not, there's tons of open source software out there. We're focused specifically on those that are aligned with this particular part of Lyrasis' mission. Lyrasis is committed to transparent and collaborative stewardship of CST program costs and resources. And Lyrasis is operating the organizational home, or striving to operate the organizational home, as an at cost, so that it's really a core component of the Lyrasis mission as a nonprofit. And as such, it's only available to programs who are also committed to open source licenses. And finally, CST programs are expected to have established governance structures with responsible and engaged stakeholders that are driving the fiscal, strategic, and technical decisions of the program. So the division of responsibility between Lyrasis and the CST is really important. The division and shared nature of those responsibilities is important to point out. Lyrasis's responsibilities as the organizational home fall under 7 broad categories. Program stewardship, which is more than just serving as a fiscal and legal entity for the CST. It also includes providing strategic guidance and administrative oversight. My role, the director, normally serves in an ex officio, meaning non-voting capacity on the CST's governing body. Human resources includes the recruitment, hiring, and supervision of any paid CST program staff. Staff salaries and benefits are paid by the CST as direct expenses, but staff are actually employees of Lyrasis. And this is really a big part of the value proposition. Lyrasis has a professional HR department, includes opportunities for professional development, and is generally a really good place to work. So individuals working for a small CST have colleagues working on similar things and are part of a larger whole. Staff also are supported by professional enterprise infrastructure that includes access to IT professionals and resources. The fiscal infrastructure includes normal accounting and financial reporting services, such as a bank account, the ability to disperse funds in adherence with program budgets, and it also includes the infrastructure to manage invoicing, renewals, and collections. Basic marketing services also include website and graphic design, as well as various other types of marketing materials. And program infrastructure includes collaboration tools such as wikis, video conferencing, virtual event software. And the final category is software development infrastructure, which obviously needed for open source software development, and includes support for acquiring and provisioning standard services and tools needed to develop the technology. And as noted previously, this is really a partnership between Lyrasis and the CST, and the community really plays an important role. Lyrasis is not a home for orphan programs, or doesn't strive to be a home for orphan programs. So there is an interdependency, and the success and health of the Lyrasis organizational home and the CST depend upon each other. So the community has a number of responsibilities in this relationship, and as represented by its governance, it's responsible for developing and executing the strategic vision for the program, and that includes defining its governance structures, revenue models, pricing, developing a roadmap for the technology, determining its resource needs, and engaging the community. Those governance structures are populated by the community according to its bylaws and policies. The communities that are currently part of the Lyrasis organizational home have governance structures which enable rotating participation from individual volunteer community members. Participants come from institutions and organizations that sustain the technology through their contributions, financial or otherwise. A benefit of contributing your resources means that you have the opportunity to help drive. These governing bodies all have different approaches and different policies and procedures. But one thing they all have in common is a dedication to the technology and the community. The community works together with Lyrasis to define and stick to an annual budget. It consults with Lyrasis on staffing decisions and its plans for collecting revenue and doing fundraising. Software development may be done by individual volunteer community members, paid staff, or some combination. And finally, the community is responsible for engaging, inspiring, and sustaining that engagement of its members. So currently, these 5 CST programs are in the organizational home. ArchivesSpace, which is an archive management system, DSpace, an institutional repository, Fedora, another institutional repository framework, CollectionSpace, a collection management system, and VIVO, which is a research information management system. I want to note that we do plan to grow the home and are working on developing an incubation program for CSTs that are in the early stages of their maturity. And although there's a lot more I could say about the organizational home, the main point of being here today was really to talk about potential overlap and synergies with the activities of Curios. So it would be interesting to note that many Curios members are also members of ArchivesSpace. You can see several listed here. There's at least a couple that are members of DSpace. Several more members of Fedora, members or users of Fedora. CollectionSpace, at least one is a CollectionSpace user, and at least one is a VIVO member. So you can see that there's definitely overlap in the communities and the institutions. And I'm sure this diagram is familiar to you all because I took it from the Curios website, but it's not surprising, and it's probably also not surprising that there is almost a complete overlap between the activities of an OSPO with the activities of the Lyrasis organizational home. Lyrasis helps and provides funding and financial support, although the programs also bring their own support. Lyrasis does advocacy and helps with policy setting. It is working on developing an incubation program to support the creation of new or emerging open source communities. It provides a lot of tools for helping with community building and supporting of community building. I'll mention that It Takes a Village framework, which Megan Forbes, I know, is very familiar with, is one of the writers of it. But it's something that it's a framework for how to build up and sustain community-driven software, and lots of great resources there that it's sort of a fundamental part of the organizational home methodology. We develop and provide tools and infrastructure to support open source technologies. We work with, not specifically with tech transfer, but with external partners, helping particularly around the funding area. Definitely support and provide access to educational efforts. And a big part of being part of the organizational home is being part of a cohort of like technologies with whom you can develop and share best practices. So definitely a lot of overlap there. Very similar. And I think there are probably many other points of connection and interdependence. The ones I'm going to share here might be a little simplistic, but if you think about it, an academic institution depends upon open source software in both of our domains, open source software related to research, and open source software for digital cultural heritage. An OSPO supports open source software related to research. That software produces research outputs that then are stored in open source institutional repositories. An OSPO engages, educates, supports, and connects individuals that are interested in building open source software. Those individuals are capable of doing things like code reviews, tech docs, unit tests, bug fixes, feature development, community engagement. All of these things are actually critically needed by the open source software for digital cultural heritage, particularly definitely by the CST programs that are here at Lyrasis, but more broadly in the community as well. So, and this is my last slide. I want to say, what I want to be here to talk about today is how might we begin to take advantage of and really build upon those connection points. The whole point of being here is to begin a discussion about that. But some of the ideas that I've been thinking and wondering about are, are there places and ways in which we can do joint advocacy with whether with institutional leadership or with funding bodies or elsewhere in the community? Certainly, as we saw, there's large overlap in activities. So are there places that we can be sharing best practices and tools? Are there opportunities for us to connect open source practitioners with communities that are in need of resources, whether they're at Lyrasis or elsewhere? a big question, and one of the challenges I think generally for institutions working with open source and wanting to sustain their work in open source, particularly at the infrastructure level, is the need for integrations. So are there opportunities here to help and support integrations of open source technologies across the ecosystem, across the academic ecosystem, so that we can further support an institution's desire potentially to switch fully to open source technology as opposed to needing to rely on commercial solutions. And how can we work together to think about sustainability pathways for both for emerging open source that's being used by research, and open source that's being used to actually support that research in one way or another. Um, and I think there's probably many other things, and that's what I'd love to just have a chat about. So that's the end of my slides. So I'm happy to take questions on anything that I shared, or we can just have a general conversation.